Hi, I'm Elizabeth Mendenhall with RE/MAXes in Mid-Missouri. We have RE/MAX Boone Realty in Columbia, Missouri, and RE/MAX Jefferson City in Jefferson City. And today I'm here to talk about appraisal contingencies that happen in a contract. And in 2021, in a hot market, there's a lot of conversation on contracts, multiple offers, and appraisals coming in to meet a contract sales price. So the first thing is, let's just talk about appraisals in general. Appraisals are performed by a licensed appraiser. They are hired by the lender. So a lender who is making a loan on the property wants to ensure that that property is going to appraise at the price of which they are loaning the money. And so they hire an appraisal. An appraiser goes out and they perform a valuation of the property. They look at the property to see if it meets the criteria, and they're going to come in with their estimated value of what the house is worth. That value then is compared to the sold price. And so a couple of ways that an appraisal contingency can work. If a buyer can only obtain the loan if the lender is willing to loan a percentage of the sales price, then it's going to need to meet that sales price in order for them to purchase the property. So they might put what's called an appraisal contingency in a contract. Now, it also can be that a buyer might buy a property and not make it contingent on an appraisal. So in that instance, they're comfortable with whatever it appraises for, and they're willing to make up any differences between a contract price and then what the lender's willing to owe on it. So that would be a contract without an appraisal contingency. But the appraisal contingency is written into the Missouri Association of Realtors contract, and that general appraisal contingency can be checked. It's an option to be checked by the buyer that says it's going to need to be appraised at the sales price. Now, in a hot market, which we're seeing in 2021, many of our properties are selling above list price. And so a list price obviously is a price determined by the realtor and the seller. The seller determines what they want to sell their price at. But when we're seeing a low shortage of inventory, we're seeing buyers make prices well above the list price, and not always are they appraising at the sales price. And so in those instances, we have different appraisal contingencies that we contend with. So let's give an example of how an appraisal contingency might work, and also what we call an appraisal gap contingency clause. If the house is listed at $300,000 and it ends up having multiple offers, or maybe a buyer comes in and they want to make sure they get the property, so they make a really strong offer and they write the contract for $310,000. If they were to use the appraisal contingency in the contract, it would need to appraise for that sales price of $310,000. Otherwise, the buyer might have an option to get out. But because, again, buyers are writing prices well over list price, the appraisal might not come in at that. So if the appraisal came in at $305,000, there would be a gap between the appraisal price and the sales price. So the question is whether or not the buyer has the money and the funds to make up that difference, because that would be one of the options of how a buyer could remedy the contract, because it has now come in with a gap. If a property was written with an appraisal gap clause that said a buyer is willing to still purchase the property even if it appraises less than the list or the sales price, then that's a pretty strong offer. It's definitely stronger than an offer where we know the buyer may not be willing to make up that gap. So two different ways that a buyer can approach the contract to provide strength to the seller. There's a lot of different ways that a buyer can provide strength by, for example, writing a contract in the time frame that he knows the seller wants to sell, or certainly providing the asking price, but also giving an indication up front that I'm willing to cover that gap if there is a difference between the appraisal price and the sales price. Possibly a buyer comes in and says, hey, I'm willing to write a contract for $310,000 and I'm willing to cover it if the appraisal comes up to $306,000, but I may not be able to cover it if it goes any higher than that. And those are some of the different terms that can be addressed in an appraisal gap clause. Now, as always, the buyer needs to make sure that he can receive the funding from the lender if that's what he needs, or that he has the additional cash funds to cover it. And because markets are tight, it may not be that the buyer makes that initial offer up front to the seller of that additional cash, but what they do is they show their strength that they're willing to cover the gap between an appraised cost and the sales cost. As you can see, markets that are changing require expertise, and that is what a RE/MAX realtor provides to you. So as you have any more questions with appraisal gap clauses, appraisal contingency clauses, as always, if you do have questions above and beyond those that the realtor can provide to you, make sure you contact an attorney. We always want to make sure that we make that disclosure. But it's another reason in a hot market that is extraordinarily valuable to have standardized forms which are written by realtor associations, which a realtor provides, but also that you have a realtor who's experienced, and that these are the discussions that they're having as they can advance the offers and try to achieve the American dream for everyone who wants to afford it, who can afford it, and also wants to have a home in the United States, and especially in Missouri. So we thank you very much. We hope you contact your latest RE/MAX realtor who can help you with more of these twists and turns as we see real estate picking up in hot markets in 2021. Thanks.